Hi everybody, I'm Rook and welcome back to the table. We are in top 5 week. Welcome back to another top 5 video. This week we are looking at my top 5 speed duel cards that were dead on arrival. I'm talking that it came out in the set, in the starter deck, and no one used it. A great card with huge potential, but seemingly never picked up based on what was already out and what had come out at the time. So before I get into this top 5, I want to remind you guys that if you have your own strong opinions, please feel free to comment them below, or you can tweet me at Rook's Table. Please be nice. And the following 5 cards aren't vanilla cards that, of course, it's got 800 attack, no one's ever going to use that. No. These 5 cards happen to be all viable effect monsters that for some reason it just didn't click with the meta or the deck types, and the majority of people have not taken them up to use in a deck. Let's come in at number 5, we have Gravekeeper's Priestess. This one hurts because it's in a tournament pack. They put this in tournament pack 1. When Gravekeepers came out in 2019, when the speed duel format started, you saw a lot of Gravekeeper's Recruiter, Gravekeeper's Oracle, Ambusher, 1700 attack, the strongest attack in the format for a 4-star at that time. You even saw Spear Soldier and Assailant, just because they had stronger attack, and we were trying to figure out the meta if Flip was going to be something to deal with. We actually saw Spear Soldier have a resurgence when the Ultimate Predators came out and everybody started using Maneater bugs. So Spear Soldier was also a good one. Then there were a couple others that no one was ever really going to use, like Vassal. I think Shaman was there. But Gravekeeper's Priestess, have not seen it anywhere. Maybe you played it on your kitchen table last year, but that's it. This card had the potential to be good because all Gravekeeper's monsters gain 200 attack and defense, and the card's treated as Necro Valley. Necro Valley has a lot of great effects that help you by blocking your opponent's graveyard off, and of course Gravekeepers benefit from it. But the big Gravekeeper plays in Speed Duel right off the bat were essentially trying to figure out how you contribute for Oracle to lower your opponent's monster's attack to 0 as one of the effects that Oracle has. It was really all around playing around Oracle and using Rite of Spirit to get cards back onto the field to tribute for Oracle. Additionally, we saw a lot of Gravekeeper's Curse as fodder for that, and that has since exploded into the Gravekeeper's Burn deck using Curse. So 200 additional attack and defense is an adequate amount to buff your Gravekeepers, especially you're looking at an Ambusher that's already at 17, that would put it to 19, but the consensus around my table is that Gravekeeper's Priestess was too much of a liability. At 1000 attack, if you put it on the field to try and get the attack and defense buff, it really just wasn't worth it, and it's taking up a whole monster slot with there only being 3 available in Speed Duel. There were a few other cards that came out that did essentially what Gravekeeper's Priestess did, but better. Some of them were equipped cards. One of them in particular that was a favorable trap for the beginning of the Speed Duel meta was Kunai with Chain, which buffs a monster. It's a trap card that buffs a monster by 500 attack, and it has an additional effect where you can also flip the opponent in defense mode if that's still not enough. But Gravekeeper's Priestess with just the static 200 attack and defense wasn't cutting it, especially when the Gravekeeper's deck were really just trying to figure out how to get out Oracle. So Gravekeeper's Priestess, it hurts to see that printed in the tournament pack, just a card that could have been used so much more, but unfortunately. Coming in at number 5. Number 4 for me is Master Craftsman GAMIL. I chose this card because we only have like 3 hand traps in the whole game. We really just had cards like Sphere KURIBOH, which has withstood the test of time and is still a staple. Gentle Mander, which you kind of see come and go, but that's a great card that kind of stops an attack in its track, and if you have 2 in your hand, you can create a little bit of an attack lock there. But then we had Master Craftsman GAMIL. This card came out, and it was just completely looked over, a 2-star fire monster. We don't really see a lot of fire monsters in Speed Duel format either, unless you're trying to play something like Jurax, but this is a hand trap effect that during the damage step, either player's damage step, when a face-up monster you control is attacking or being attacked, you can drop it to the grave, and that monster gains 300 attack. It's not a card that you'd want to summon, it's just 200 attack, 200 defense, but it's a hand trap that buffs a monster by 300 attack. It's not subject to magic removal. There are some additional discard effects in the game now that could make it be subject to getting discarded, but at the time that it came out, there really weren't that many discard effects, so you could easily tech this into a deck and then have that hand trap drop for an additional 300 to beat over a monster. The main reason that I think this didn't work is because there were too many other cards that either boosted attack further, and maybe it was a spell or trap card and people were okay with it taking up a spell slot, whether it was an equip, something like Kunai with Chain, or even something like Windstorm Matakwa that changed battle positions and the defense was typically lower in a lot of the meta cards that were being played. So Master Craftsman GAMIL unfortunately was looked over, but I think it was a really cool idea to have another hand trap in there. Hand traps are usually explosive and really fun to try, especially as you slowly introduce more into a relatively newer format at the time, but this one was looked over. Number 3 is Lady Assailant of Flames. This one came out recently in the new starter decks this year, and it contributes to the whole burn effect theme. This is another fire monster, and you don't see too many fire monsters, but it's a 4-star 1500 attack, but you really want to use it for its flip effect. The flip effect is that you banish the top 3 cards of your deck, and then you inflict 800 damage to your opponent. 800 in Speed Duel is pretty substantial. I mean, we're only starting at 4,000, but I think that another thing that's substantial that makes this card not so great is the banish the top 3 cards of your deck. Speed Duel is a format where we can quickly all of a sudden go into a deck out situation, as a lot of players are only building decks consisting of 20 cards. So to have 3 banished, and at this time in the Speed Duel format there's really no way to get banished cards back into the grave, into the hand, etc., it was too much of a liability if you go into a deck out situation just to do 800 damage to your opponent. I think that the card art is really cool. There are a lot of other burn techniques that you could attack this card into, especially if you don't necessarily care about how many cards are left in your deck and you're trying to burn your opponent down as quickly as possible, but using your normal summon to set this monster to then try and flip it the next turn without it getting destroyed in the process, and also being only a 1500 attack monster, whereas a lot of monsters are coming in at 17 or even 1800 attack now, just made it not quite quick enough and not quite powerful enough to be considered techable in the meta of the decks and the cards that were out. Coming in at number 2, and this is another controversial one, so guys, feel free to defend this one in the comments below. But the number 2 monster that I think was dead on arrival, there's a really great concept, but it just wasn't picked up, was Dark NECROFEAR. For those of you who don't know, Dark NECROFEAR is an effect monster that must be special summoned by banishing 3 Fiend-type monsters from your graveyard. This came out in the Twisted Nightmare starter deck in May of this year, alongside a plethora of other Fiends. But I think that the inherent problem behind this card is that you banish 3 Fiend-type monsters from your graveyard and it comes out, and then if it was destroyed by battle or card effect, which is the only way it's really going to be destroyed in Speed Duel, you can then take control of a monster your opponent controls. So a lot of different effects coming out of Dark NECROFEAR, and I think it's a really cool concept. I think that the reason why this card didn't work in the Speed Duel format is because Fiends really didn't work in the Speed Duel format. I mean, Into the Darkness Below is a Bakura skill that has an effect based on the number of different Fiends in your grave, and it really encourages you to fill up your graveyard with Fiends. But there were so many Fiends that when the deck came out, aside from Kitchen Table or you just playing with a starter deck as is, you really didn't see too many Fiends. We picked out Gap the Defiant Soldier, we picked out Dark Ruler Hades, we maybe picked out a couple other Fiends that kind of work in a lot of decks, good tributes, and otherwise solid cards, but we didn't find enough Fiends worth running or worth constructing a deck around to make Dark NECROFEAR as potent as it could be. And I know that this is a cult card. This is a card that a lot of people like. And I know that somewhere in the corners of the world, in the basements, on the kitchen tables, people were trying to make this card work, but it just wasn't happening in the Speed Duel format. I hope that there's additional support that makes Dark NECROFEAR viable. If there is good Fiend support and good Fiends to play, splashing this card into that deck is a no-brainer because you're eventually going to have 3 Fiend-type monsters in your grave. Another thing that I think made this card not work as well is that it's a really specific requirement for a 2200 attack boss monster to come out when there are other boss monsters out there right now that have significantly higher attack. Even the defense is kind of low at 28. I mean, a Blue Eyes can blow over that. But I understand that the real appeal of this card is that if it goes to the graveyard, you're taking a monster from your opponent. Well, there's a card out there called Inner Conflict, which is played in one of the biggest meta decks right now. That's the skill that's essentially a change of heart by paying half your life points. So I think that in a couple different ways, the Speed Duel meta has Dark NECROFEAR beat. So Dark NECROFEAR, that's my number 2. And coming in at number 1 of my top 5 Speed Duel cards that were dead on arrival, another classic, another fan favorite, KURIBOH. KURIBOH was not used when it came out in the starter decks in May. You know why? Because we already had Sphere KURIBOH. And in the meta that we're in, and with the cards that are out in the format, Sphere KURIBOH is an inherently better card than KURIBOH. KURIBOH is another hand trap, actually similar to Master Craftsman GAMIL. Hand traps are always appealing and always have the potential to be really explosive. But KURIBOH's effect just doesn't get the job done. During your opponent's turn, at damage calculation, you can discard the card, you take no battle damage. And it's a quick effect, so you drop this into the graveyard, there's no battle damage. Everything's fine from a battle damage standpoint, but Sphere KURIBOH already does it so much better because you drop Sphere KURIBOH to the graveyard, and not only is there no battle damage, there's no battle. It flips your monster to defense mode. And typically, having an opponent's monster in defense mode is much less threatening than attack mode, and it gives you an opportunity to battle over something that's in defense mode. So unless you're trying to be super evasive to attacks and you're already running 3 Sphere KURIBOH, and so you want to put in some KURIBOH as well, I think that might be a little excessive in a 20 card deck potentially, but KURIBOH is going to be my number 1. Sad to see the card not being used. I think if they released it last year, it would have been used all over the place, and then maybe we could have seen Sphere KURIBOH this year, or maybe in the Battle City box, but Sphere KURIBOH just easily beats out KURIBOH. So KURIBOH, that's my number 1. And those are my top 5 Speed Duel cards that I think that on release just weren't used, frankly. They were dead on arrival. So we are in top 5 week. We have a top 5 list coming to you every day this week. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to like and subscribe. And of course, comment below if you have any other strong opinions about where some of these cards are on the list. Do you use these cards? What other cards do you think should have been really good but then no one used? Let me know. Thanks guys, I'll catch you later.